Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at another heartbreaking case with you. This is the story of a family whose laughter was silenced forever. A father's loving embrace turned deadly. No one knew that dark secrets hid behind his smile. What horror drove him to unspeakable evil? Our love and respect go out to all those who knew and loved the victims and all those affected by this case. 59-year-old William Michael Parente was born in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, to Willie and Rocalyn Parente. His father, Willie, was a police officer for the state of New York. Parente grew up in Bay Ridge, along with his parents, and spent summers with his family in Long Beach. He finished school at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, thanks to his uncle, Anthony J. Russo, who paid for his education at both schools. Parente married Betty Mozzarella in 1997. Betty was a stay-at-home mom who was very active in their community. After becoming a member of the New York Bar, which means he became a licensed lawyer, Parente joined a law firm on Wall Street. This was a big step in his career. In 1988, he decided to start his own law practice. He did this because Betty was pregnant with their first child. After moving to Garden City, New York, Parente and his family often returned to his old neighborhood in Brooklyn. His daughters, Stephanie and Catherine Parente, were well liked by their teachers and classmates. The family lived in a beautiful neighborhood in Garden City, New York, where the houses were worth millions of dollars. Their home was next to a golf course, making it a lovely place to live. Parente always commuted to Manhattan for work, while Betty spent her time volunteering for various causes. They often went back to Bay Ridge to visit friends, eat favorite foods, and see family members, especially Parente's mother. They also went back every year on Halloween, so his two daughters could trick-or-treat in the same neighborhood where Parente had trick-or-treated as a child. The family was close-knit and seemed to have a good life, but behind closed doors, something was terribly wrong. Later in his career, Parente was involved in making short-term loans, which he called bridge loans. A friend even commented that he essentially worked as a bank, which means he lent money to projects that were still waiting for approval. He made loans that were quite risky and had a high chance of not being paid back. To fund these loans, he allegedly used money from investments that he was in charge of. So whenever an investor would call him asking for their money back, Parente couldn't give it to them right away, and he couldn't clearly explain why he couldn't pay them back either. On April 20th, 2009, friends and college officials of 19-year-old Stephanie started to worry when she didn't show up to her classes on a particular Monday. They knew she wouldn't miss her final exams, so they felt something was wrong. The school was aware that the Parentes were visiting their daughter Stephanie, who was a sophomore at Loyola College in Baltimore, Maryland. So the college officials contacted a local hotel and asked them to check on Stephanie and her family. Stephanie's younger sister, Catherine, who was a sixth grader at Garden City Middle School, was also with them on this trip. At around 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter the family's room on the 10th floor, but the door was locked and no one answered. The housekeeper told other staff members what happened. A hotel manager then went into the room and found Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom. He had taken his own life with a knife. The manager immediately called emergency services. The manager then continued into the room and found a horrific sight: 3 bodies arranged on one of the beds. The deceased were 58-year-old Betty and her 2 daughters, Stephanie and 11-year-old Catherine. The scene was extremely disturbing. The police from Baltimore County were called to the scene, and all other guests on the 10th floor were moved as part of the investigation.
59-year-old Parente bludgeoned, then killed his wife and 2 daughters. They died from asphyxiation. It all happened Sunday in a Sheraton hotel room in Baltimore, Maryland.
The family's Mercedes-Benz SUV was also taken from the hotel's parking lot by law enforcement officials as part of their investigation. The exact order of events was still very unclear and frightening. The authorities and investigators had to work hard to figure out what happened. After a thorough investigation, they finally determined that the deaths were caused by asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. After this discovery, more light was shed on the tragic events that occurred. The investigation showed that Betty and Catherine were likely the first victims, followed by Stephanie. Parente's violent outburst started with his wife and younger daughter before moving on to his older daughter. Law enforcement officials believed that one of Parente's last interactions was with Stephanie's roommate. She had tried to call Stephanie around midnight, not knowing that something terrible had already happened. Sadly, Stephanie had already been murdered by her father at that point, and her roommate's call came too late to save her. Parente picked the call, and Stephanie's roommate later reported that he sounded odd over the phone and did not sound like himself. After this call, it is believed that it was then that Parente went to the bathroom, feeling overwhelmed with guilt and shame. He then ended his own life with a knife he had bought from the mall earlier. This was the last death that occurred, marking the end of an entire family. A friend of Stephanie's, Gabrielle Page, who was 19 years old, told the Baltimore Sun that Stephanie was surprised when her family showed up for a visit. They had already planned to come see her that Friday, so it didn't make sense that they would come earlier. Gabrielle said Stephanie had a big chemistry test to study for and didn't really have time to be with them. She also said that Stephanie never mentioned her parents to her, nor did she ever mention any financial problems that they might have been going through. Stephanie never mentioned any family issues, and as far as she knew, there was nothing to worry about. She also mentioned that Stephanie's family had just called her and said they were in Baltimore, and it seemed like they decided to come on a whim. Gabrielle didn't understand the events that took place on that Sunday, and she didn't think any magnitude of financial problems made it any more understandable. Investigators believe that the reason behind the terrible actions was Parente's big financial problems, and because there was already an investigation going on regarding his financial activities. He knew he'd soon be exposed, even after he had kept everything private. While the Baltimore County Police were looking into the crime, they found out that Parente was being investigated by the FBI for a suspected scheme that might have cheated investors out of a huge amount of money, $20 million. Specifically, someone had made a complaint against Parente, saying that he had lost them $450,000. This was a very serious accusation, and the police were taking it very seriously. They were looking into all of the details to understand what had happened and how Parente was involved. At least 3 investors claimed they lost millions of dollars working with Parente. Some other people who invested money with Parente also said they lost a lot of money, at least $12 million, and maybe as much as $35 million. Some of these investors stated in the court papers that Parente was running a type of scam called a Ponzi scheme. They claimed that instead of using their money to invest, Parente was using money from some clients to pay returns to other clients, like a game of shuffling money around. He was paying returns of 12 to 15%, but it was all just a trick.
Now police may have the answer to that burning question, why? They're looking into the possibility that Parente may have run into some financial troubles. One New York attorney claims he lost $450,000 to Parente. FBI officials are now, quote, looking into Mr. Parente's investment business dealings.
Almost a year after the tragedy, a fight happened over the $5 million of life insurance money that belonged to Parente. This fight was caused by a special trial that happened after Parente's death to prove that he was the one who killed his family and himself. Dr. Marie-Jeanne Castado, a gynecologist from Manhattan, said in a written statement that Parente cheated her by lying and tricking her, and she said he did it on purpose. She also wanted a share of the money which she claims Parente cheated her out of, but proper investigation had to be done before any money could be dispersed. An FBI spokesman said that the FBI was looking into it. Some of Parente's friends and colleagues didn't believe that he cheated anyone. They were sure that the accusations were not true. One person appointed by the court to handle Parente's estate had also filed papers in Nassau saying that Parente didn't do anything wrong and couldn't have cheated people out of their money. Joseph Mazzarella, who was Betty's cousin and a funeral director in North Belmore, was in charge of taking care of the estates belonging to Betty and her daughters. He mentioned that Betty's two nieces, who were the daughters of her late sister, should get some of the life insurance money.
In the deserted Parente home, Joe Mazzarella and 3 family members come to pick out dresses to clothe their 2 dead nieces for the funeral.
Can you tell us how you're doing?
I'm not doing very well, sweetheart. If you're missing 3 people that were there to you, you wouldn't even ask that question. All right? So please,
yes,
no
sir.
more. Okay, please.
Joseph's lawyers even offered a deal to the group of investors who accused Parente of cheating them, saying they would be given 10 cents for every dollar they invested, but the investors refused the offer. Eric Milgram, a public administrator in Nassau, was in charge of Parente's estate. He was taking care of Parente's belongings and money because Parente's relatives, an elderly uncle and aunt and 7 cousins, didn't want to be involved. Even though they didn't want to be involved, there were possibilities that they got some of the life insurance money. Eric went to court to try to make everyone see that Parente might not have been responsible for the deaths and that Betty's family should get the life insurance money. In court papers, Eric had stated that Parente might have been insane or under a lot of pressure before the killings, and that would mean he wasn't responsible for what happened. Many people who were upset and demanded their money back would have to be handled by whoever ended up in control of the life insurance policy. These were co-workers, acquaintances, and clients of Parente's who claimed to have contributed funds for his investments. They were angry because they believed Parente had mishandled their funds. The surviving family members would have to decide how to respond to all of those demands and claims. Parente's investors thought they were lending him money to help construction projects that needed emergency loans. They believed he would use their money to help build buildings or fix houses. They gave him a lot of money over a period of almost 20 years. They thought they would get high interest rates in return and that he would pay them back with extra money added on top. But it turned out that Parente was not using the money for what he said he would. He was not using it to help construction projects at all. One of the people who lost most money was a dentist from Garden City named Anthony Salerno. He was the first person to tell the police that he thought Parente was running a scam. He told the police about his suspicions just a day after the bodies were found. According to court records, Anthony and his wife Kathleen gave Parente a whopping $950,000 from their savings account and $1 million from their retirement fund. They thought they were investing their money safely, but it was obvious that Parente was not honest with them. Anthony was overcome with emotion as he spoke to the detectives, his words filled with despair. He said his life was falling apart, and he couldn't hide the pain. He wasn't ready to open up just yet, and he refused to comment further when he was asked. Meanwhile, the Baltimore County Police had handed over the investigation into Parente's financial troubles to the FBI, leaving Anthony unsure of whether he was ever going to get his money back. The police documents showed that on April 14th, Parente told his lifelong friend Dorothy Schimmel that someone had threatened his life and he was very scared. Dorothy, who was 84 years old and lived in Manhattan, said that Parente looked very bad and was mixed up with the wrong people. She said he didn't look good, and he seemed worried. The police were still trying to find the people who worked with Parente, but they hadn't found anyone yet. The detectives were also searching for answers, and they had to ask if the police were trying to find out who the wrong people Dorothy talked about were. A police officer, who wanted to stay anonymous, said that even though they were investigating and trying to learn more, they also thought it was possible that those wrong people were not real. The court case made the Parente family's personal life and money matters public for everyone to see. Their friends Stephanie Nguyen and Julianne Malley said that the Parentes were a family that cared a lot about their status and kept their lives very private. But now, court records showed that their wealth was not as solid as it seemed. They had very little money in the bank, less than $5,000. Their big house in Garden City, which was worth $1 million, had a big mortgage of $600,000 that they still owed. They also owned a condo in West Hampton, which was worth $250,000. But they owed $500,000 on 2 mortgages, and the bank eventually took it away. The people who lent money to Parente were demanding to be paid back. HSBC wanted $21,850. Citibank wanted $16,396, and Parente still owed $11,000 for his Mercedes-Benz car. All these debts added up, and the Parente's finances were a big mess. The court papers revealed that the Parente's status was a lie, built on shaky foundations. They appeared to be wealthy, but in reality they were struggling with debt. Parente was a man who was very careful and thorough, according to what his friends described him as. But surprisingly, he did not even have a will. His wife, Betty, also did not have a will. This left their family members very confused and wondering how this could be. Mazzarella, a family member, out of disbelief and curiosity, asked how it was possible that Parente could have been running a Ponzi scheme when he had no money in his bank accounts. He also couldn't figure out how to help the people who invested money with Parente because there was no money left. He said to the investigators that the investors Parente owed couldn't get anything back for what they had lost because they didn't have anything to give them. On a Monday night, the family and friends of the Parentes gathered outside a funeral home on Long Island, mourning their loss. They were there to say goodbye to Betty and her 2 daughters, who had been killed in a very sad and violent way by the person they loved and trusted most, the father and husband.
But in the quiet neighborhood in Garden City, New York, where the family lived, well-wishers continue to lay flowers at the Parente doorstep. For them, it's hard to believe their own neighbor could have done such a thing, regardless of the reason.
The coffins were covered in flowers, but it was a closed casket funeral due to the state of the bodies, as at the time of the funeral, people were not aware of the motive behind their painful murders. Catherine's school said that she was a very special child who was loved by her teachers and the staff at her school. They thought she was wonderful, talented, and very sweet. Stephanie, the older daughter, was a strong and athletic person who had been on the women's crew team at Loyola University and had also helped the men's team as a coxswain. She was a kind and helpful person who had volunteered her time with Habitat for Humanity, an organization that builds homes for people in need, and at a Catholic school in Baltimore. She had also been accepted to study abroad in Newcastle, England next year, which was a great opportunity for her. Friends and neighbors were very surprised to hear the bad things and allegations that people were saying about Parente. He seemed like a successful lawyer who had a good life and a nice home in a neighborhood where the houses cost a lot of money. Nobody thought he would be involved in something like that. A funeral mass was held on a Tuesday to say goodbye to Betty and her daughters. There was also a private service and cremation for Parente, but it was separate from the funeral mass for his family. What are your thoughts on this case? What do you think drives people to wipe out their family like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Be well, and I'll see you in the next one.